Well, I will do an introduction and then ask some questions, and I promise that I will not ask all the questions. So if you have questions of your own that you would like to ask, we can have question and answer and also a signing as well. So I will do it a little formally to welcome those who are watching on video as well. It seems that most of you don't need any of this introduction, but let me get started. So again, welcome. My name is Kathy Santillo, and I'm one of the people on the events team here at R.J. Julia Booksellers. And Hannah Rothschild, as you know, is an author, filmmaker, philanthropist, and businesswoman. Her first novel, The Improbability of Love, was shortlisted for the Bailey's Women Prize for Fiction and won the Bollinger Everyman Woodhouse Prize for Comic Fiction. Her second novel, House of Trelawney, which we've been looking at before you arrived, was a runner-up for the Everyman Woodhouse. The first woman to chair London's National Gallery, she was awarded a CBE for services to literature and philanthropy. And as I was preparing for tonight, I came across what Vogue and Publishers Weekly had to say about High Time. Hannah Rothschild contains multitudes. Her gimlet-eyed observations, gift for portraiture, and willingness to turn anything and anyone into a joke make her a joy to read. That's what Vogue had to say. As for Publishers Weekly, a convulsively comic sequel to Rothschild's House of Trelawney, with scenes that are over-the-top hilarious and a sharply satiric view of late-stage capitalism. High Time plays like a savvy cross between Brideshead Revisited and Succession, as written by the Monty Python troupe. So let's get ready to hear directly and in person from Hannah this evening. Thankfully, as I mentioned, we will have time for Q&A, so be sure those cell phones are silenced. Let's enjoy this discussion together. Please welcome Hannah Rothschild. So thank you. I have so many questions here that I will go ahead and kick off with a question, and then we will continue our discussion and go from there. So I wanted to start with, you were a documentary filmmaker for more than 20 years. What did you learn from documentary filmmaking, and how does it apply to your work?
Firstly, very nice to be here. Thank you for your introduction. That was lovely. This is a beautiful bookshop. Absolutely beautiful. I don't know anything quite like this in the universe. So it's amazing. Documentary filmmaking. So what did I learn? When you obviously make a film, you're editing on you got to edit sound, you've got to edit pictures, you've got to edit stories, and all those things have to work together. So you're kind of editing on lots and lots of different levels. And that has proven to be very useful for me when it comes to writing, because as those of you who've read my work know, I like having many different storylines and people coming in and out at all times. So actually, I think that my background training in documentaries and that form of editing has stood me in very good stead. In fact, I can't imagine writing a book just about one person and one story. I think I'd get bored and fidgety. I think I need to have all those different bits and threads.
As readers, we could imagine you getting bored right in that way. We wanted at least to touch on, if not talk more deeply about leadership. And so the question is, you were the first woman to head the National Gallery in 200 years, the first female Rothschild to sit on the board of the family bank. How did it happen, and how does it feel?
Well, firstly, it's disgraceful, isn't it? Yes, it's disgraceful. A national institution for 200 years. So, I mean, it's obviously, to break a glass ceiling feels there's something gratifying about it, but there's also the gratification is offset by the kind of, what the right word, it's not irritation, it's not disappointment, it's not quite, I'm not quite sure how you put it, but you think, oh, shouldn't have taken this long, should it? The National Gallery, I applied to be a trustee through an advert in the newspaper, the Guardian newspaper, which is a kind of left-leaning newspaper in the UK, and I was appointed by Labour government, so just in case anyone thinks this was an old boys club, it wasn't actually. And I'd loved it since I was a child. I used to go there with my parents, and in fact, it was a very good place on a rainy, we lived in London, and it was a very good place on a rainy afternoon, because you would basically they let us go. We ran around, and there were guards looking after the painting. My parents figured that actually they'd probably vaguely look after us too, which they did. And we would be there for hours and hours. So I knew the collection, I knew the gallery very well indeed. And in fact, the Improbability of Love, my first novel, came from being a child and running around and looking at paintings and wishing the paintings could talk back to me and tell me their own stories. So when I came to be a novelist, long circuitous route on round to your question, where we'll get that. When I came to be a novelist, and when it was so utterly informed by that childhood experience. And actually going back to run the institution or chair the institution, so I didn't run it. Thank goodness for the institution, there are very good people doing that. But again, it didn't feel unfamiliar. It felt like coming back to a place that I knew and I loved. So that said, the day I started at the National Gallery, the day everybody went on strike, nothing to do with me. I hasten to add. It was just there was a union issue going on. So it was quite hair raising. I'm not going to pretend it was easy. It was, I hadn't done negotiations with strikers before. I hadn't done that. I hadn't been, to large organizations, and people were very, very angry. Not saying justified or not, but they were. So there were lots of things I had to learn very quickly from scratch. And as the first woman, I was not going to let the side down. That's really important to me. If I had got to this first woman thing, I wanted to do it well and not be embarrassed.
So glad that made me so happy.
No, great, another happy person. And the fact that again, slightly longer because we have a little bit of time. So if you don't mind, I'll take a little bit of time. Please wave if you're bored. So in my family, started. I'm not going to do the whole story, so don't worry. But we're a Jewish family. We started in the ghetto in Frankfurt in the 18th century, and that was when the founding father sent his 5 sons to the 5 capitals of Europe to make their money, which they did remarkably quickly. But although the founding father was a brilliant man, in his will, he said the following, that no woman, member of the family, or her husband could either own shares or work in the family business. And astonishingly, that held firm until very recently. And so no women were allowed to work in the bank. And the only thing that we, the females in the family, were allowed to do was to work as bookkeepers or archivists. But really what we were supposed to do was get married and have children. So it was a terrible policy, because for the first 100 years, there were very good male Rothschilds to run the bank. But actually, then, I'm afraid to say, they got rather less good at banking. They're very good at other things. So they're very good at, they were quite good scientists, for example, cricketers, God knows what else, but they weren't good bankers. So what the family had done inadvertently by holding on to this rule was to, in a way, almost cause their own extinction. So I am, yes, you're right, I am now on the board of Rothschild and Co. And I haven't actually had my first proper board meeting because it's run in France. And I tell you, they're less efficient than we are. But anyway, that's just 17. And we'll see. I think again, the thing is, you don't want to let the side down. I want to do it well, and I want to, I want to do it well for women. I want to do it well, because actually it's about time. So there's a kind of double-edged sword again. I don't know if other people have these experiences. Were you personally instrumental in getting them to change this no female policy? No, I wasn't. I mean, I think that I think, to be honest with you, they just slightly ran out of Rothschilds. I mean, I'm just being really frank, and I sit on the board of other financial companies, so I know what I'm talking about. I have learned that. So I think they thought, well, okay, let's have that. But no, I wasn't. I'd love to say I was, but I wasn't. I hope there'll be an avalanche now. That's my plan.
Well, and staying on the topic of women in leadership, another question that I have for you is, so who have you learned from? Obviously, there were many men around. Were there specific women leaders?
You know, things have changed a lot, haven't they? We know there are now many more women leaders around, and there are many. You know, but when I grew up, I'm 61. When I grew up, there actually weren't that many women in positions of power to look to. I mean, there were some. I had great good fortune growing up of working. When I started writing, I used to write for Tina Brown and Anna Wintour. So Tina actually gave me my first writing job. She used to edit a magazine called Tapper. And Anna was editing Vogue at the time. And then I started writing for both of them. And actually they were both in their own way incredible writers. Anna is, and she still is, I believe, but one of the marvelous things that I learned from her, and I've tried to replicate, is that when you used to go into Anna's office, which is a fairly terrifying thing, because Anna Wintour is she is a very serious, quite fierce woman. And if you've got to go into the office, you didn't want to waste your time or her time. But there was no chance of that anyway, because she would give you the brief about what to write about, and she was so clear. She said, I want this many words, I want it in that style, I want you to bring in this subject, I want this, that, and the other. There's no kind of hello, how are you? You look nice, which I probably didn't anyway, but you know what I mean? She was just like, and that was a great note actually. So you were very clear, and I think leadership from her I took away, be clear. Just if you want something done, don't be rude, but say, okay, this is what I'd like, and this is what I'd like. And I think that's a great thing I learned from her. From Tina Brown, who was less, has a different way of getting to things. But gets you more G'd up anyway, and she gets you excited around the subject. But one thing I do remember her saying to me was, I was quite scruffy, British people tend to be a little bit scruffy, and she said, look, let me give you a piece of advice. She goes, what you want is for people to listen to what you say, not to look at what you're wearing. So go and get a suit and don't come back now. Just tough. But actually it was kind of cool. She's and I took that to heart. You're nodding. Have you said that too?
No, a book that we just read, the one that has like a soap opera title.
Is what I'm saying?
The one we're reading now about the
Young and Restless.
the Young and Restless. It's about the role that females have had in American history in revolutionizing things. And there's a lot of references to sort of chicken and an egg, which came first,
Right.
the clothing or the movement?
Okay.
Or was it a symbiotic relationship? And just so when you brought that up, it was
Okay.
exactly sort of the point they were making.
Right. I mean, I don't know if it's. I mean, I hope now that it's a bit more relaxed. I think now, you're allowed to express yourself a little bit more. Just remember, it was the 80s, so it was rather different. It was kind of power shoulders, were different. Power suit.
Yes.
Shoulder pads. Shoulder pads and power suit. But it was interesting thing there about. It just struck me. Anyway, they were two. I mean, there have been many other women who've been incredibly influential, perhaps. And actually, I had a great aunt. This is a nice story. So I had a great aunt called Miriam Rothschild, and she, who was an ornithologist and a naturalist and a biologist, and she was known as Queen of the Bees because she was the world expert in bees. Yeah, so she was an amazing. She, talking about clothes, she had a slightly different thing. So she said to me, when I was very young, she said, let me give you my advice. She was not slow about giving me her advice or anyone else. She said, have one haircut, one style of dress, and stick to it. Because if you do that, you will not waste time. She said the amount of time people waste thinking about how they should cut their hair or what they should wear or what they should buy. She is indefensible. And she would never wear anything with leather on. So she wore moon boots when it was cold, you know, big, they call moon boots here? Yeah, moon boots when it was cold, Wellingtons when it was wet, you know, Wellington boots, long boots, and trainers, which were the equivalent then, when in the summer. And she had one dress, which was a totally shapeless dress, by the way, totally. But it didn't matter, she didn't care, it's not sure. And she had her hair was long to the end of her life, and every morning she just clipped it back. And she got to the top of her profession. And she wasn't. I mean, she'd be horrified if she thought she was being remembered for advice from hairstyles, but nevertheless, I would share that.
Memorable advice for sure. Well, staying with women just for one more minute and one more question. So you met the Empress of Iran,
Yes,
the collection in your book. What were your impressions and why did she start this collection?
So she probably wouldn't like us to call her the Empress of Iran, by the way. She probably would correct me, the Empress of Persia, I think. I met her after she was exiled in Paris in the 80s, and she was a very striking, good-looking woman. While she'd been married to the Shah, and which I can't remember how long they've married for a very long time. At the time, which is not particularly unusual, art and collecting art become part of the kind of smart thing to do, you know, whether you're Iranian or French or Italian. And of course that started with the Medici and before, many hundreds of years ago, but she felt that actually it was a very good thing to do in Iran and to bring a wonderful collection to Iran. So she had various advisors and she started buying, and she bought very, very well. She had good advisors and she was brave. So she bought Picasso and Warhols and Rembrandts and Renoirs and contemporary artists like that worked at the time, like Bacon or Rothko, etc. So they amassed a very, very large collection very quickly, within about 3 years. And then when the revolution came and they had to leave, obviously, very, very quickly, they left the art behind. Now, the Ayatollahs, for them, all this art was problematic because it's problematic for many reasons. One is that it represented something they didn't want represented, i.e., kind of what they saw as wasting of public money on ephemeral objects. Number one. Number two was a lot of these pictures were rather like when the Nazis came into power and the National Socialists decided a lot of art was degenerate. The Ayatollahs also thought a lot of this collection was degenerate. So it was taken where it has remained, quite a lot of it, underground in Tehran. So some stuff has been sold, we think. Some stuff occasionally shown, but a lot of it is just there, and it's a kind of uncomfortable reminder, I think, of the previous regime. And I went to meet her with a mutual friend who'd known her when they were. I'd never been to Iran, but I went to see her in Paris because I was very specifically interested in trying to find out about this collection. Anyway, she had kind of more important things to think about than a young reporter trying to find out about the collection, quite honestly. But she was gracious enough to receive me. But it wasn't. I can't say it was very involved. But anyway, she was very nice. But that it is a kind of, it's rather interesting to think that these great masterpieces are still there in a bunker.
Wow.
And they won't come out. Well, I don't think they'll come out in possibly my lifetime.
It's interesting to think about. So as we turn a little bit more towards high time, a question, Trelawney, the stately home in your book, it feels very real. Is it? Can you talk about your experience of staying or living in one?
So I don't live in a stately home. Sorry to disappoint. I do look after one with the rest of my family. So there was a Rothschild house called Waddesdon Manor, which is owned by the National Trust that we manage. It's in Buckinghamshire. If any of you go to England, it's amazing. Do go, please go. It's extraordinary.
What's the name of it again?
Waddesdon, which is Waddesdon. And it's got a collection of very kind of unusual collection. It's a kind of, it was collected by one of my forebears at a time when a certain kind of art and artifact was in vogue. So basically, it's known as Wunderkammer, but it's the things that the Habsburg princes like. It's quite neat. So it's things like vast pearls, which a goldsmith had made into a cavorting mermaid, or rock crystal, which a silversmith incorporated into a dancing horse. I mean, they're very peculiar things, but they are, as a result, it's kind of, you like going into a kind of very unusual treasure cove. There's a room at the Met. It's called the Mrs. Weitzman rooms, and that's quite like it. So next time we go to the Met. So anyway, back to stately homes. So I don't live in one, but I have had the great pleasure of staying in quite a lot. And the one that inspired Trelawney is actually a real house in Cornwall called Port Eliot. Which really, we're being filmed versions of Netflix, but it's a little bit rough around the edges. Beautiful house in the most extraordinary setting in Cornwall, and it was lived in until quite recently by a very dear friend of mine. And it was so cold in winter that if you should get the kitchen lovely and warm, you'd have dinner in the kitchen, but you would literally have to run from the kitchen up the corridor, down the main stairs, round the corner, up another staircase, down another staircase to get to the only other place where there was a fire. You know, an open log fire. So it was pretty cold. It was incredibly cold. They didn't have any radiators, let alone central heating. Like that. It was very romantic, and it was also quite cold in the summer. I remember put my coat on there. But it was that, yeah, it was based on family.
And to bring us a little bit back again in terms of time, your previous book, The House of Trelawney, the precursor to High Time. So that was set in 2008 with the crash. This book, which features many of the same characters, is now set in 2016 against the backdrop of Brexit, the rise of Trump, and so many contemporary issues, cybersecurity, crypto, short selling, political corruption. And yet it's also a satire. So why did you decide to set it against those issues?
Because when I decided to write about the family, and you don't have to have read the first one necessarily to read this one. I mean, some people do. But I wanted to look at the world through the eyes of one family, and in a way, when I started, I was more interested in trying to understand what was happening in the world than with the actual family. So I actually started by saying I want to write about the financial crash in 2008. Because I wanted to understand what it meant and what its impact had been on many different kinds of people and many different layers of society. So when I thought of that, I thought, okay, so the most interesting way of doing that is trying to look at those events through one family. And then I invented the Trelawney. So I invented this family, very dysfunctional, quite kind of funny and quite silly. They were very wealthy at one point. They've fallen on hard times. Imagine that description I just gave you of the house, Port Eliot. That's very much what it was like. And they had to run, they had to run from one place to another. They had 4 radiators. They had, about 5 bathrooms that worked. So this one family lived in the place, and then the crash happens, and it's really what happened to each of them and the people they were connected with when the crash happened. Because I don't know what your experience or memory was of 2008, but I felt that we tend to look at it through the eyes of people who work in finance, but actually it had a cataclysmic effect on many people's lives. It was, as you know, it was a very devastating effect on people's lives. So I wanted to humanize it and bring it down to a kind of to the family unit, which is a unit which I like exploring. So that's why I started. And then similarly with this one, I wanted to look at 2016. I wanted, as you say, for the Brexit, Trump, Johnson, at cryptocurrency, all those things. And again, I thought, well, let's look at that through the family. By that point, I've become so fond of this family, but let's just bring it back. So that's really how it happened. So it's funny, it was the events first and the family second.
Interesting. And we've talked about some of the characters, some of that, but not as much about satire. So a question for you. What can you achieve using comedy and satire, which straight narrative doesn't?
I mean, it's a way of writing. I think if you can be tongue in cheek about something, you can quite often get away with a bit more. So I think if you gently, I hope I'm not horrible about anybody. One character in this book I'm quite horrible about, that's fine, you deserve it. But I think with gentle humour you can say an awful lot more sometimes than you can just through straight narrative. I haven't read Damon Copperhead, is it called that? Have you read that? Yeah. I mean, that presumably is taking the OxyContin prices, I think, in the Appalachians, isn't it? But using it through a Charles Dickens, is that, am I right about that? Yeah. And I imagine that's probably not very funny. No. So I don't think I could take that subject on.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Because I think it's a desperately serious
Yes,
subject that
very
deserves.
true to life.
Yeah, it really deserves a huge seriousness and compassion, and Barbara Kingsolver, I think is, I haven't read this book, but I've read her books, and I think she's clearly a person to take that on. So I couldn't do that, and I wouldn't do that to a subject which I think is so desperately sad. But actually, when you poking fun at ridiculous British aristocrats and people behaving badly in the city, I think that's fine. I think it's okay. So I think it depends if you're if you are depends what the subject matter is, but if you think it's one that isn't going to offend, or that you could kind of shine a light by being humorous, I think that's okay.
Well, I think we think it works. And we think you know how to do that.
Good. Yes, I don't know how to do things. I don't think I could. I mean, but I don't think I couldn't do what Barbara himself does. But I couldn't do that. I mean, I think she's brilliant. There are lots of writers. I'd love to write like them, but I can't. But I can. This is what I can do. That's what I think. Yeah.
I'll go that.
Thank
And what you can write about are families. So I'm going to dive just again, I'll throw a couple questions you
Sure.
can answer as you wish. So your first book, The Baroness, was a work of nonfiction.
Yes.
And so is there anything else about your family that you could tell us? And were there any issues writing about your family?
Yeah, I think you could be quite brave to write about your family. Because of course, but everybody in the family has their own very strong recollections of the same event. So you can think about, an event last year that maybe you and your family were at. You can almost guarantee that everybody who was at that event will have a completely different memory or completely different interpretation of an event. And so that what I think and what I remember is really only my opinion, but I knew that therefore I was going to upset a lot of other people by expressing that. And you supersize that when it's somebody you're related to, because people think, well, this shouldn't get out, you're airing the linen, whatever it might be. So I had a lot of pushback from certain, not all members of the family. Some thought it was fantastic, but some didn't like it, because the Baroness is the story, I'm assuming that
You're done.
You're done.
Were you a child when she was?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I never knew her because she lived in America.
Right.
And I discovered her in the family tree.
Okay.
So I literally was looking at the family tree, and it said Panonica, and I thought, well, who's that? And my father's aunt, quite close. Strange. I asked, who is she? Well, she lives in America. So remember, back then, America was a long way away. We didn't have kind of 88 flights a day, whatever you have now. And I said, well, tell me more about it. And he said, well, she likes jazz. He said, I mean, he wasn't being kind of disparaging. He just said, well, she likes jazz, I couldn't really find out anything about her, and I kept asking everybody about her. Come on, people, and more. Come on, tell me more. So I found out before I'd met her that Charlie Parker died in her apartment, that her great love was Thelonious Monk. That she'd gone to live in America, but nobody really saw her. So being incredibly inquisitive and nosy person, which I am, I went, well, the first time I went to New York was in the early 80s, and I looked up in the phone book, and it's a Baroness Canonica de Königsberg. I knew that she'd married, so I knew it was a different name. So I rang her up. I said, hello, I'm your great niece. It was incredibly long time. Then she went, wild. Of course, exactly what you want your great aunt. By the way, any of you are the great niece and rings up, just remember that. I shall do it soon. Quite.
How old would she have been?
So then she was already in her late 60s.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so she said, and then so she said, I said, can we meet? Yeah. Okay, yeah. She said, well, meet me downtown. And so that time was downtown New York was not like now, it's like a more scary place. And she gave me an address right downtown. And I said, and she said, this is the street and that's the cross street. And I said, yeah, but where do I find it? She said, just look out for the Bentley. And then she hung up. So okay. Okay. Off I went. And I took a taxi. Didn't really want to take me down there, and I took a taxi. And there indeed was a Bentley, convertible Bentley, lights on, two guys sitting in the back, pointing at a door.
Oh my God.
Knock on the door, and a guy comes here, so he says, what do you want? And I go, I'm looking for Nika, and he goes, what are you talking about? Banana thing, what are you talking about? The Baroness, why didn't you say? And the door opens. And I go down into the club, and there she is sitting by the stage, nearest the piano. There's the piano's playing. And she's sitting there, she has a, kid you not, a teapot, and two cups and saucers. And she doesn't even say hello, she doesn't something like that. She just says, you know, so would you like some? She goes, and I go, So she pours out this beautiful golden coloured liquid into this thing, and of course it's whiskey. And that was my first meeting, and she tried to educate me about jazz. She did quite well in me. And I would go and see her. And I think, as you know, if you've read the book, she lived in a house with a lot of cats. And as you know, jazz musicians are called cats. There were a lot of those cats as well. So, it was just astonishing, because I had no idea you could have a life like that, a different life. It never occurred to me that you could just disappear and reinvent yourself the other side of the world and be so happy. She was so happy. She loved what she did, and she was lucky enough to have money, and she lived very humbly. And the only thing there was nothing ever in the fridge apart from cat food. It's all there was in the fridge. And then in the cupboards there were some crackers. And she, as far as I can see, she would eat them. But she gave every single thing she had to the musicians to try and keep them going, to try and keep the roofs over their heads, or their the instruments from being in the hop, or their wives when they went and had babies. I mean, that's what she did, and that's what made her happy, and she found the thing that made her happy. So I mean, I had to be honest with you, I live in the house I was born in, so I haven't actually moved very far, but I intend one day to have a different life.
By your belly.
I think there's a statute of limitations in having a different life. Do you think there's
No.
Okay, good.
No.
Didn't she have children come over and visit her? Didn't her daughter come over?
Well, yeah, the thing that people find very difficult is that what happened was that she had 5 children,
Yeah.
and she was during the war. So the little one was actually born just after, but she had 3 or 4 the Second World War, and she went to Africa because her husband was fighting for the Free French against the Nazis. So she followed him because she didn't want to sit at home. Basically, she wanted to do something. She wanted to be useful. So she smuggled her way to Africa from England, not easy. Her geography was dreadful. So she landed on the west coast of Africa, and he was in Egypt, which was the other side. Right? So that was a problem. So she had to somehow get herself across Africa. Not that easy in the 1941 or something. And she got all the way across to Africa. And I think what happened was that in the process of fighting in the war, I think that to slip back into domestic life was never going to be very easy. It wasn't easy for lots of women, you know that, who've been emancipated. So she decided, she never really, I mean, she lived with her husband and her children for a little bit after the war. But what happened to her was that she went to New York to buy some clothes, practical clothes. She went to New York to buy some clothes. Her husband was a diplomat, and he was the ambassador to Peru. And so there was nowhere really to buy clothes in Peru. So he said, you know, he was very, very, very controlling. She was allowed to go to New York once a year to buy some new clothes. And while she was there, she was about to get on a plane to go back to her husband and her children. And this guy, a friend of hers, said, "Have you heard the music of Thelonious Monk?" No. So he said, "Well, let me play it to you." And he had a turntable, and he put the record on the turntable. He put this needle, those of us Alfred couldn't know it, but this is how we used to play records. Move the arm of the needle over, and he put the needle down, and out came round midnight, and that haunting opening round midnight. And she said it was like the vinyl version of a spell being cast, and she never went home. Never went home. But she left the 5 kids. I mean, not advocating anyone does that, but I don't think she was cut out from motherhood. It's not her thing. Apparently. Apparently. But the kids came to see her and they loved her, and I think their father was actually a very good father and a very pleasant father, and he got remarried, and so they had that life. And then the moment they were old enough, they would come and see her in New York.
Well, what a fascinating personal chapter of jazz of all things.
Yeah.
I didn't expect to hear that in such detail. What a wonderful story for us to share. And I can't wait to use wild on a great instrument. That will be my takeaway for sure. I have plenty more questions, but why don't we open it up now if you have any additional questions, Jess? Anyone?
Any chances of Trelawney becoming a movie?
Yeah, I hope so. Somebody's asked.
It would be
Wild. Good, wild, excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, goodness knows what's going to happen with the writers' strike, but there are people, I have been asked, there are a couple of people who have tried to option it.
Okay.
There's not, none of them I felt were quite the right people, to be honest with you. There was, you know, it's very easy when these things get optioned for it to get kind of lost forever, you know, in development, etc. etc. So when I do want it to have the right chance. So I want it to be the right company and to have a good chance of getting made. So the 2 people so far, one I felt really wasn't what they'd done. I couldn't really see it working. Their sensibility, I just didn't see it work. And the other one I felt, although I loved what they wanted to do, I thought the chances of getting made were really zero. So there's now a 3rd company that's come along and we'll see. Nice, isn't it?
Yes, oh, absolutely. We all have our images of what it
Yeah.
would look like, right?
Are any of the characters based on, you know, family members? And
Of course not.
no, tell anybody.
It's funny, I think writers, you kind of do, you beg, steal and borrow.
Compilation. Yeah.
So somebody may have started out being a little bit like, you know, somebody you know or a family member, but actually by the time you finish, I tend to do between 14 and 20 revisions of a book. So by the time it's got to the 14th, they're pretty unrecognizable.
Yeah.
But you're great aunt. Yes,
The Queen of
she's
Sweden.
clearly the entire. She's very much, but she's very much. And actually, funny enough, she's not. She of all of them is probably the most like a real person. Because actually, you don't really have to make very much out.
Yeah.
She was much more fierce than Tuffy. Much, she was very fierce. Tuffy's got a slightly softer side.
Now, you said you were in your childhood home, so it is the home that your parents have?
So it's your childhood.
That you said you were in your childhood home?
Oh yeah, exactly. It's where we grew up. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's tragic, isn't it? It's a nice home, but
Yeah.
yeah, but it's slightly kind of strange to think that. I was looking out the window, a tree fell down in the garden the other day, and I was trying to work out, I was thinking, God, you know. It's even older than I am, this tree, and it's given up. I'm just very cross with it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
why is that tragic? It's not tragic. It's a nice home.
But I think I should be more adventurous, but as I say, there's time, isn't there?
Your books are.
I think that's my adventure, all right, that's exactly, well put.
And a great way for us to wrap up, and you've come here to Madison to be with us, that's adventure as well.
That is an adventure, by the way. I saw the sea today, it was so exciting.
Yeah, well, we're certainly happy that you've joined us,
Very,
and
very much.
let's join in a round of applause. You can be around the corner.
Lovely.
We will be around the corner and we'll have books, and your books can be signed
Yes.
there, so just give us 2 minutes.
Sure.
I'm just gonna click this off.